The movie begins in 1776 when several leaders play games as they sign an independence bill. They celebrate and say that Abraham Lincoln and his best friend George Washington will be jealous. The men take a selfie, and Benedict Arnold emerges. They are startled by his presence, and several British soldiers enter the building. They shoot and kill all the men, and Arnold destroys the building. A white eagle flies away, but the smoke reaches it and turns black. Arnold picks the Declaration of Independence and says he has a play to attend. Abraham Lincoln argues with a man about his unfair taxation and walks away. He sees George Washington swinging on a chandelier, and he lands beside him. The people clap, and Abraham commends his jovial lifestyle. They get matching shirts and step into a theater to watch a play. Arnold emerges and talks to Abraham as George is focused on the play. He reveals that he betrayed his people, joined the British Empire, and shreds the Declaration of Independence. He transforms into a werewolf and bites off Abraham's neck. Abraham falls to the ground as he bleeds, and Arnold mocks George. He jumps on the stage and curses the audience as he runs away. George holds Abraham as he bleeds, and Abraham instructs him to regain their independence and rename the new land America. He eventually dies, and George rushes out of the theater. Arnold's men prepare for George's arrival and fight him as he emerges. They overpower him, but he gains the upper hand as Arnold insults him. He uses chainsaws from his sleeves to fight and kill the men as Arnold escapes. He jumps on Arnold's cart but hits a bridge and falls off. George kneels on the ground and screams America, but a man in a building asks him to shut up. The following day, they hold a burial for Abraham. After the burial, George talks to Martha Washington, who realizes he has gone through a lot and suggests he doesn't spend the night alone. George and Martha make love that night, and she tells him she is pregnant with his child. He goes through some childhood photos of him and Abraham and begins to cry. Martha tells George to avenge Abraham's death and suggests he gathers a team of people who are relentless like he is. She tells him she knows Samuel Adams, and George decides to meet him. Samuel has fun at a frat party and detonates several explosives that make it rain beer. George walks to him and introduces himself. He says he needs help forming America and Samuel wonders what America is. Samuel realizes George wants to fight the British and decides to join him. He narrates how he invented beer, and George enjoys it as he tastes it. He shows off his weaponry skills, and George is impressed. George says they need a horseman, and Samuel knows a place. That night, they arrive at an underground horse race and watch as two men race on horses. A man in knight armor emerges and pushes the men off their horses because they are maltreating them. He wins the race, and George and Samuel go to him. The horseman removes his helmet and reveals himself as a young man named Paul, who is abnormal and desperate for friends. The British soldiers arrive, and the trio rides into the forest. Samuel says they need heavy hitters in their group, and George says they want to burn a witch at the town square. The trio arrives at the town square and watches as some British soldiers prepare to burn someone for being a scientist. The scientist escapes easily and defeats the soldiers. George and the others ask the scientist to join them, and they realize she is a Chinese woman named Thomas Edison. Samuel is reluctant to let her join, but she says she'd love to go against the British. George realizes she is super smart and asks what they'll do next. She says they need an expert tracker and suggests Geronimo, a Native American. They go to his hut, and George asks for his help. Geronimo says the British killed everyone he knows and loves, so he wants revenge. King James, the king of the British, arrives at the seaport and talks to Arnold. Arnold tells him everything is going according to plan but says that George and his group are going against their rules. James instructs Arnold to crush George and his people. Meanwhile, Geronimo uses the scent from a handkerchief to take them to the Vietnam bar. George convinces the others to join him and fight the soldiers in the bar, and he makes a dramatic entrance. The group sees Arnold in the bar, and a fight ensues, leading to the destruction of the building. Arnold tries escaping through the sewers, but Geronimo catches up to him. Arnold transforms into a wolf and bites his arm, forcing him to cut off the arm, so he doesn't become a wolf. Arnold gets in a cart and tries to escape, but Paul summons Clyde, his horse, and they pursue him. The pursuit becomes an epic cop chase, and Paul dodges several obstacles. They see Arnold's carriage beside a rover and see as he uses a jet ski to escape. The group tries jumping to the other side of the river with the horse but falls into the water and struggles to survive. They return to shore, and Samuel finds where Arnold will be. They realize that the region is vast, and they don't have the Gettysburg Address. George suggests they give up, and Martha enters the room. She meets everyone excitedly, and George says they aren't a team. Martha gives a motivational speech and says that George has to fulfill Abraham's dreams. He gets motivated and decides to continue his struggle for freedom. Geronimo reminds them that Arnold is a werewolf, and they create a silver bullet. Paul suggests they use the blacksmith who made his armor, and they agree. The group goes to a man named John Henry, and George keeps calling him Blacksmith. They ask him to help them create a silver bullet, and he says he doesn't trust any of them. He agrees to help them because he hates the British, and they are ruining his business. Henry refuses to make the bullet for free and says the British seized all the silver to make spoons. They wonder where they will get 3,000 spoons overnight, and Henry takes them to the Titanic. George says they need a plan to prevent anything bad from happening, and they agree. Henry refuses to work with them and says he will make the bullet when they bring the silver. The group wonders what they will do, and Samuel suggests they dress as British soldiers. The soldiers capture them, but George motivates them, and Paul breaks a wall down. They enter a secret lab and see some colonists transformed into British people using tea. Thomas tries to gather information from the machine, but George breaks a pod, and the tea destroys it. The ship catches fire, and the group steals the silver spoons they need. On the shore, Samuel suggests they tell people that the Titanic hit an iceberg and they had nothing to do with it sinking. George returns home and talks to Martha, who tells him she can't rule the same way Abraham did, and he has to find a method that fits him. He tells her they retrieve the spoons, but it's useless without the Gettysburg Address. Martha asks him to rest, and they go to bed. George has a dream and sees Abraham. He says their dream ran out of money, and they want to use the money for an epic-ending battle. Abraham says George will have a son and instructs him to rule over all the sons and daughters of America. George hears Martha screaming and rushes downstairs. He sees Arnold and some British soldiers with Martha and tries fighting them with his chainsaw, but Arnold removes the gas. They take Martha to the Gettysburg Address and knock George out. The group sits in a mall, and George rushes to them. He informs them that Arnold kidnapped Martha and realizes that Abraham is a cryptographer. He says that the word America is a cipher, and he'll have to crack it to get the Gettysburg Address. He says someone will have to take the spoons to Henry while he and the others crack the code. They play a game that Geronimo doesn't understand, and he is forced to take the spoons. Arnold informs King James that they'll use Martha to lure George and the others. He summons the head engineer, who hasn't finished the machine he is building. James releases his pet football, Manchester, and it eats the man. George and the others arrive in the forest, and he shows them a large tree house where he and Abraham hang out. They enter the building, and George begins to decipher the code. Paul and Thomas play a game outside, and Thomas realizes Paul joined them because he wants to make friends. She says she wants people to enjoy science, but the British think science is sorcery, and they try to kill her. George emerges and says he has cracked the code. He says that A=1, and 1 America is a location in Gettysburg. They go to the address and realize it's the only building in Gettysburg. They see several redcoats in the building and decide to wait for Geronimo to return with the bullet. Geronimo sits in a strip club with Henry, and they insult George and the others for always thinking they are winners. Henry gives him the silver bullet, and they laugh because they are wasting time. George is unable to wait, and they decide to enter the building. They sneak in but realize that everything is fake and they've been set up. George accidentally grabs a bomb, and Thomas tries to defuse it but makes the timer run faster. Paul takes the bomb, jumps on his horse, and rides away. Clyde pushes Paul off his back and says he has new friends. He picks up the bomb and runs away, sacrificing himself as it explodes and kills him. King James emerges as a hologram in the building and mocks George and the others. He reveals that he wants to marry Martha and George challenges him. King James accepts the challenge and gives George the address. The hologram turns off, and they hear Paul crying outside. They go to him and see that Clyde is dead. Thomas suggests they meet a renowned medical practitioner named Clara Barton. They meet Clara, and she says she might be able to save Clyde, but he'll be more machine than animal after the procedure. King James eats a lot of food and disgusts Martha. Arnold arrives, and James says his doomsday machine is ready. Arnold asks James about their newly acquired kingdom, and James gives him a small town to rule. Arnold rips his heart out and says he wants to rule the entire kingdom. Meanwhile, George instructs the others to rest because the next day is the epic showdown. He sees a note from Abraham behind a picture and makes 1,000,000 friends. He goes to a supermarket, purchases several guns, and asks the man for a photocopier. The following day, Samuel and Thomas meet George for the epic showdown. Arnold arrives with the entire British army, and Big Ben transforms into a giant robot. Geronimo and Henry arrive and say they'd rather have George as their ruler than the British. Henry gives him the silver bullet, and George gives everyone matching shirts and says it will be their flag if they win the war. An eagle flies by, and they call it their national bird. George sings a song they call their national anthem and thousands of people emerge. He explains that he made flyers, and Paul, who is now a cyborg that's merged with Clyde, helped him distribute them. George distributes several guns to the people, and Arnold instructs the army to attack. The war of attrition begins, and the colonists fight the British. Big Ben kills Paul Bunyan, but Babe the Blue Ox destroys it. Arnold flies in a crown-shaped ship and damages Thomas's gear. George and the others continue fighting, and Arnold instructs the soldiers to attack the front lines. George sees Martha on an elephant, and Thomas helps him get to her. He gets on the elephant and realizes that Martha was transformed into a British woman. While Manchester fights Samuel, Arnold emerges from his ship and kills Babe the Blue Ox. Samuel uses his tongue to turn him into a football and throws him away. Arnold activates the Doomsday Machine, and they see that it'll make the clouds rain tea, and the tea will turn everyone British. Samuel decides to drink beer as he prepares to lose and says beer is the opposite of tea. Thomas gets an idea and transforms a barrel of beer into a machine. She attaches the machine to a gun and shoots the Doomsday Machine. It begins raining, and Thomas says she reversed the polarity of the tea, turning it into beer. The British people become frat boys, and as Martha drinks the beer, she transforms into the Statue of Liberty. She apologizes for trying to kill him and says he has an epic boss battle to fight. George and the others try to fight Arnold, but he transforms into a werewolf and fights them. Samuel accidentally drops the bullet, and they search for it as Arnold beats George. Martha finds it and throws it to Henry, who plays it like a baseball. The bullet hits Arnold's head and kills him, releasing several fireworks. George stands and welcomes everyone to America, and they destroy the British Tower. 6 months later, George builds a monument for himself and prepares to build one for Abraham. Abraham's ghost appears and gives George the declaration. Samuel arrives, and George gives him a hat. He puts it on and becomes Uncle Sam. They get on the stage, and George gives a speech on the grand opening of America. A man asks about their slaves, and a fight breaks out as several minority groups argue for equality. George realizes they've got a lot to do to rule the country. The end. Thank you for watching. Check out these other videos and make sure to subscribe and tap the bell to be notified about our latest videos. See you next time.